fiction into fact.
Sometimes kind of real architectural life interferes with intellectual architectural life.
There is no such thing as architecture.
Hello everyone, this is Vikram Prakash and you are listening to Architecture Talk. We are in the middle of a special series chronicling and thinking about our experience during this pandemic, during our lockdowns. We are calling this Architecture in the Time of Coronavirus, and we are casting far and wide, listening to architects, academics, thinkers, and practitioners from diverse disciplines, trying to catalog their experiences during this exceptional time and trying to advance the frontier of architectural thinking through their understandings of life and the practice of their crafts. Today I'm talking to Tanya Wells, one of the two principals of Seven Eyes, a music performance group whom I heard about first when I heard Tanya singing beautiful renditions of Indian classical and light Indian classical music, in particular ghazals. She recently released a video of another song that she composed in Mumbai, dedicated and inspired by the city. I used this as an opportunity to have a conversation with her, to query her on the possibilities of linking music with architecture. It's a great conversation. I hope you will enjoy it. Here we go. Tanya Wells, thank you so very much for coming on Architecture Talk. I am such a great fan of your music. It's so amazing listening to you perform live, listening to your sort of concerts from home, and of course the new albums that you're putting out. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's an interesting time, isn't it, for us with internationally with all this stay-at-home orders and quarantining and the impact that the virus is having on us. How are you doing? You're in Geneva, in your home in Geneva? How is it? How are you coping? How is your home been to you? Has it been a friend? Have you modified your home to make it more comfortable? How are you and Paolo, your husband, doing?
Well, thank you for asking. We're doing really well. And we have moved to Geneva since the past 2 years. We've been here. And we're located in actually my auntie's property. So she has a little cottage on her property. And then we have her house. And she has the most wonderful, expansive garden with a host of apple trees, prune trees, cherry trees, and she's the most green-fingered person I know. So she's always out in the garden and it's spectacular. So we are very lucky to have beautiful nature around us. We're in a little village, actually, 20 minutes outside of Geneva City. And we're just 3 minutes walk from the lake, the Lac de Léman, which is,
of course,
one of the biggest lakes, I think the biggest lake in Europe. We do take advantage of that in the summer where we go swimming. So I can't complain. We're in an incredible area of beautiful natural beauty. And I'm also learning a lot from my auntie with regards to gardening. So that's been keeping me busy, along with making music with Paolo. We have our own little music room studio here where we can record. We've got all our instruments here, and we have been quite proactive with recording our monthly singles. So yeah, we've been doing that throughout 2020. And even though the lockdown has stopped many of our activities, luckily our monthly singles are still continuing, and we've basically been managing to write and record and get our music out on digital platforms without much of interruptions. So that's been quite good.
It almost seems to me like the lockdown is almost good for you. Like feels like the kind of enforced isolation provides a time for meditation and focus. Maybe would you say?
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, I would. For many of us, it's allowed us to take a much slower
Yeah.
pace. And with that does come introspection and meditation. And meditation is something that I have always done since I was very young. Perhaps we will talk about that when we talk about
Right.
Dharamsala later on. But I have found I've really enjoyed slowing down and watching nature more, just seeing how the weather changes. I mean, taking time to notice
Hmm.
nature and taking time to notice, oh, the rosebuds are coming out, and just taking time to watch more and be in nature more, and enjoying those short walks that we're allowed to have, an hour out of
Okay.
home, just enjoying that moment.
So what about the other 23 hours in the home, in your auntie's home?
Mhm.
Are the walls
Mhm.
starting to climb on you, or are you feeling comfortable?
I'm quite a homebody. I feel quite. I mean, obviously, there are days. I think earlier on, I was starting to feel
Uh-huh.
the cabin fever, and then I would just need to, go out for a walk. And I think that's quite important, just to have a change of scene, a breath of fresh air. But I'm quite comfortable with cracking on with work at home. And generally, Paolo and I work from home. We have our recording studio here. We write and compose at home. And we've got this sweet little cottage that has a beautiful outdoor space as well. Like I said before, we have a lovely garden and we have a terrace. And when it was sunny, we could go and eat on our little terrace. And so, yeah, I would say we're very lucky and fortunate to have an outdoor space that we can enjoy in this lockdown.
Well, Switzerland is one of those countries and
Mhm.
landscapes that has been in many ways part of the Indian Bollywood imagination. All the Shammi Kapoor films from the 1960s, which would be filmed in Paris, or if they
Mhm.
could make it to Switzerland, it was sold to us as kids. I
Mhm.
grew up in India, in Chandigarh, in the 60s and 70s.
Mhm.
Switzerland was so sold to us as this dream landscape, and quite
Yeah,
alternative
yeah.
in one sense, I suppose, and other to the dense urbanism of a place like Bombay or Mumbai.
Mhm.
How do you negotiate between these two places, between sort of the idyll that you're describing around Geneva and the kind of density
Mhm.
and sweat and of a place like Mumbai?
You know, we were living in London before we moved to Geneva, and we lived in East London. And I would say London also has a very fast pace, like Mumbai does as well. You get thrown into the pulse of city life, and you are met with so many different people concentrated in one space. I would say Mumbai has that a bit more than London, but having moved from London to this little village outside of Geneva, it was quite a shock. But I was also I was welcoming this expansive beauty that was all around, and the fresh air. That
Right.
was the biggest thing that you note is how clean the air is, and that there is no sound of horns or traffic or yeah, and that's fantastic
Right.
for
Right.
recording. So, it ticked many of our boxes, and moving here was kind of an accident in a way. I happen to have dual nationality, so my mother is Swiss, my father's English, and I grew up most of my time in the UK. But we decided to move here because Paolo had been studying in Switzerland. He had done his master's in the Hochschule, the music school,
Right.
the
Right.
music
Right.
conservatoire in Basel. So we decided this was a good sort of meeting point for us, just to, start our lives together, because we had married quite recently and we decided to move to Switzerland. But when we did have the opportunity to go to Mumbai for a concert, we spent quite a long time in Mumbai recently. It was just in
Hmm.
January we were there this year. And I have to say, I love Mumbai as a city. I've always been inspired by it. And I think it's got a particular vibe, a particular personality that is very appealing for music, for the arts, for many things. And of course, there's a contrast. I would say Mumbai it gives you so many things, but it can be exhausting as well. Because, when just one day out traveling in Mumbai can feel very tiresome because you might be stuck in
Right.
traffic for 3 hours just going from Bandra to Kolaba or
Right.
something.
Right.
It's much harder to move, but with that comes a lot of watching, and you see many people, and there's a lot of interesting things to look at in Mumbai. So, there's a kind of a positive and a negative to both places. So, and I would say that in Geneva that it has a lack of this pulse or this pace, which is kind of keeping you inspired. And it doesn't, I think Geneva is called the
Yes.
city of
Yes.
peace. So it's hard to feel like, it doesn't have that buzz of a
Right.
conventional urban environment. But with that comes, a nice
I grew up
feeling
in
as well.
Chandigarh in North India, and that was designed by Le Corbusier, who is Swiss origin, from La Chaux-de-Fonds, not
Wow.
far from
Okay.
Geneva. So I was
Yes.
once attending a
Right.
conference on Le Corbusier in La Chaux-de-Fonds, and I thought, wow, this poor guy, when he showed up in India, must have been quite a contrast from here.
Mhm.
But this sort of internationality, this sort of cross-culturality, is something that
Mhm.
certainly is a distinguishing characteristic, not only of your life but of your music and its presentation. So let's turn a little
Mhm.
bit towards that and talk a little bit more about. Let's start with your recent one of your 2020 monthly singles, Mumbai Night
Mhm.
Drive, which I just heard like last week, I
Mhm.
think.
Oh,
A
great.
beautiful thing, that a beautiful piece of music with some nice poetry that you put together with some Mumbai musicians and performers. So
Mhm.
very enjoyable. But what I was most intrigued by was this idea that a city could inspire music. I mean, how is it that the
Mhm.
cobbled streets of colonial Colaba or Marine Drive, with its bakers and streetlights and its famous pearl necklace, how does a
Mhm.
city, which I understand very materially, if you like, as a three-dimensional built object that has to be constructed with great amounts of capital,
Mhm.
labor, and expression, how does that become music for you?
It's interesting because a lot of the time when I was in Mumbai, I spent it traveling. So I was either in a taxi or sometimes I took the train. And most of the time I had my headphones on. So, you know, for me, I spent many years just when I was out on the road listening to music. And so when I was in Mumbai, I would listen to lots of different types of music. But the city itself provided a music video for me because I'm listening to music, and as I would be in a car driving through Kolaba, it the music I was listening to, which might have been at the time I was studying Hindustani
Mhm.
classical music, and my teacher encouraged me to listen to some ghazal singers. So I was listening to a
Mhm.
lot of
Mhm.
Mehdi Hassan Saab. So it depends on the sort of music that you're listening to. But when you are listening to music and you in the city, then of course the whole city becomes part of the
Yeah,
world
yeah.
of the song. And yeah, and so I also my friends in Mumbai who they live in Kolaba and they are part of the Parsi community. And I would sometimes be in the car with them and they would listen to electronic music. And again, if we were driving at night, it would inspire a completely different mood that this city sort of, when it's at night, all the street lamps are
Right.
gold in Kolaba. They have this yellow
Mm.
tone to them. And so you see the city lit up in a completely different way, but listening to sort of slow electronic music. So I think it depends what music you're listening to and how that then sort of brings the city to life through
Right.
what you're
No, I've
hearing.
experienced that many, many times myself, just driving through India or here in the United States or many other places, particularly with noise canceling headphones, has become particularly
Mhm.
pronounced that what you're saying, that the visual scape kind of becomes a music video, an MTV video in a sense to the audio. So what I'm hearing you say is that once that disconnection or connection is established, you can sort of reverse it. You then can use the video and produce a music in response.
Yeah, I think if we were to look at Mumbai Night Drive specifically, it definitely did come from those moments where we would drive around Mumbai at night. And you mentioned the Little Trims music
Right.
video that we made for it. And we specifically wanted to drive around the Kolaba area. Actually, we took the sea link from Bandra, so the base of Bandra, we took the sea link down and ventured down into the Kolaba area, and particularly wanted to pass Marine Drive because the song, it's
Yeah.
quite a dreamy
Has a
song.
sense of melancholy
And it's
almost
got
to
quite,
it.
right. Yeah, I mean, I loved the shape of Marine Drive and how then you end up in this peninsula of Lower Colaba, where you then have this rich collection of colonial buildings, and it's such a different world than North Mumbai. And it is very nostalgic. It does have, as you mentioned, the cobbled streets, and then you have this Gothic Victorian architecture, and then these big monumental structures like the gate. Is it the gate of
India Gate, yeah.
the new gate? No,
India,
the
yeah.
India Gate.
Built for King George V's visit, yeah.
Yes. And then, of course, you have the university and the Shivaji station, and they're all this incredibly Gothic and it has a very colonial
Very much so.
presence. Yeah. And it was also lit up at night. It's a beautiful building to see at night because they light up the building from the floor, and it looks quite dramatic. And then, of course, you have the sea, you have the sea breeze, which is coming into the city. And I think there's something so nice about Mumbai being a bay, being on the sea, because the sea has this power to sort of replenish the air, and especially at night, you have the sea breeze, and you have the palm trees, and it's just a very picturesque scene where you have these colonial buildings and then the sea breeze coming into the city and almost cleaning it away. And so what I allude to in the song is that the sea has this ability to sort of wash away the secrets that the street lights are capturing, and that the street lights are sort of watching the city's inhabitants and whispering the secrets to the sea. I think the sea offers a relief as well, I think, for the city dwellers, especially when I talk to people who live in Delhi. They do mention that the vibe of Mumbai is lighter and also has a more relaxed feel because it has this sea, which happens to be quite replenishing and welcomed, I guess.
No,
for the
I
city
would
dwellers.
agree that the sea, the ocean, is a defining presence to the city, which is really a series of islands, whispering secrets to the sea, you say. And you have mentioned the street lights, and in the Trims video, you mentioned T.S. Eliot, Rhapsody on a Windy Night. And
That's
I
right,
love
yeah.
T.S. Eliot myself, quite memorized long sections of his poems. And this idea of muttering streets and muttering street lights, which in Rhapsody is the street
Yeah.
lamp sputtered, the street lamp muttered, the street
Yes.
lamp said, regard that woman who hesitates towards you in the light of the door. And it also reminded me of the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. If you remember, let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless
Yes.
nights in cheap night hotels. So I've got muttering, muttered, and muttering all highlighted from these excerpts from your lyrics and T.S. Eliot's two poems. Something about muttering, and your music also has this particular one. Mumbai Night Drive has a kind of a muttering quality to it. It kind of mutters along, unlike, if I may say, the sort of crispness and fantastic mellifluence of your ghazals and tumris and so on and so forth.
Yes, it's interesting actually. The sound of Mumbai Night Drive does have quite a
Yeah.
muddy sound, and I think we were recording with two wonderful friends of mine who are saxophonists, and they live in Mumbai. Ryan Sadri, he lives in Kolaba, and Reese D'Souza, who lives in Bandra. And for this occasion, I really wanted that very rustic sound of the alto saxophone that both of them are playing, and it sounds quite rusty and like an old instrument. And one thing that I am inspired by India in general is this blend of the ancient and the modern. And so, with the brass tone of the saxophone, I wanted it to allude quite a nostalgic, an old sound that we might hear in the sort of 50s jazz era. But at the same time, jazz is a modern
Of
phenomenon
course.
of music, and then we had Mohit Gangani play tabla in the studio, and actually the studio was in Lower Parel. It was called the Cotton Press Studios, and it was a fantastic place for artists to gather and record. And I think that section, that part of Mumbai, is always being changed. But when I was there in 2012, that was quite a hit place to be music-wise, because there was a lot of live performances, a lot of jazz. A lot of the jazz scene was there in Mumbai. And so, there would be several bands performing, and it was quite an exciting place to be. So that's also where we recorded the song. And I just wanted to capture quite a nostalgia and an older time in the song. And I think the vocals do sound quite muddy in that sense. It's definitely not an uplifting, bright
Right.
sound.
That's interesting. I mean, talking about old and new sounds and old sounds that are actually new sounds. I'm like I said earlier, I'm really fascinated by the sort of active, for lack of better term, cross-culturality in your music. We know you grew up, you spent several years in India as a child, and then you've been back many times, but you live in London and now in Switzerland. And your husband's a Brazilian guitarist, and you have actually spliced in, I think, Brazilian drums into this piece as well. And you, from my understanding and listening to you and reading some of your interviews, etc., are very sure to not be categorized in one way or the other, and have a mission. I don't know what is the mission: to bridge the gap between East and West, be international, be eclectic, just make music, beautiful music, whatever it takes. Are you trying to autobiographically understand and interpret yourself as an internationalist person? What is there a political mission to the kind of music that you are trying to actively assemble, culturally speaking?
Well, I wouldn't say that I've set out on a political mission when making music. I think music has a natural way of just expressing, of just coming out. And so I guess I can't divide myself from my experiences of having lived in various countries and been influenced by the culture and the music that I was surrounded by. And I think the music that we make as Seven Eyes is really a meeting, a confluence, as it were, of these rich lived experiences that both Paolo and I have had. Me being in India and also being interested in Hindustani classical music, learning the ghazal art form with my teacher who was living in Nagpur at the time. And then Paulo, who grew up in Brazil and has a very rich experience of learning classical, like Western classical guitar, and then obviously being familiar with Brazilian rhythms. So all of these come into play. And I think actually for both of us, it's quite a natural expression for us just to create music by what we have absorbed as musicians and as artists. And it's a wonderful thing because music is so much greater than what I can desire. Music has the power
Right.
to move people. And that's something I can't necessarily apprehend when I'm creating a song. I can just try and give a heartfelt, genuine performance, but I don't have power over the listener. I can just be true to myself and true to my expression. And so when it comes to bridging the gap between the East and the West, or some people have said that, our music it breaks boundaries, and that, language and cultures have no barriers, or music has no barriers. A lot of people have said that when listening to our music, and that's a wonderful response that we have had. But I think it's coming from a place of genuine lived experience that informs how we create our music.
Nowhere near as demonstrably as you, but in some ways, I live whatever you want to call it, a globalized life. And many people do. Many people
Mm-hmm.
do. And I think there is something about that which is differentiable from a lot of politics in the world today, which is about closing borders and putting up walls and trying to
Mm-hmm.
establish certain things as American or whatever it is, British, I suppose, or even Indian, and with the right wing kind of movements at various
Yeah.
places. So the interesting thing about what you're describing is that one can say that from your life experience and from Paolo's life experience, you are bringing your history, your past, into the present. And one can
Mm-hmm.
argue, I would argue, that history has always been cross-cultural in this way. I mean, the Victorian
Yeah.
buildings that you were talking about were consequence of a very specific historical moment, right? And I can say, and funnily, when I landed in London the very first time in 1986, I thought, wow, this looks like Bombay. And,
Right. Yeah.
so there is a history to all this. And yet at the same time, it seems
Mm.
to me your music is very much about a vision, about a future, which we don't have yet.
That's interesting. I think, with that sense of history, well, you were talking about how currently the political climate is about closing borders and about asserting a particular national identity. And I would say that actually you're right. I would assume myself as a political act. I would say that our music has a political act that goes against that ideology. What is national identity? I mean, I don't think that there is just one fixed identity to any one person. We are all multiplex, and we all have multiple facets that make us who we are. So, even talking about myself, I'm a British national, but my mother is Swiss, French speaking. My father, he came from a family of service. My grandfather was in the RAF, in the Royal Air Force. He fought in several wars for Britain. And yet we grew up, my sisters and I grew up in the north of India, at the foothills of the Himalayas. And, we have, picked up a a myriad sense of belonging, because when I go back to India, I do feel a familiarity. My childhood was in India, and so I feel most comfortable. I was even explaining this to my husband yesterday. I had cooked
Mhm.
some chana chole and some rice, and I prefer to eat with my hands when I cook Indian food, because I feel much more, it just feels much more nourishing, and I feel
Yeah.
comfortable doing that. And my husband can't quite understand that, because, in Brazil they don't eat with their hands. But I also, when I was a child, I would sit with my knee up on a bench and eat with my hands and have my chapati, and I did that for several years, and it is a comfort for me to eat desi food with my hands. So I was explaining that I actually enjoy the taste more when I eat
Absolutely.
with my
Yeah.
hands. And so, all of these things are part of my identity. All of these experiences that I've gone through since a young age, are part of my identity, yet I am a British person. And so what makes you British? All of these different experiences that we go through life inform who we are. And so I don't think that there is one British identity or Indian identity. Like, we are just multiplex, and we've got different aspects.
Yeah, no, it's a complicated thing. It's like, how can you both simultaneously be how can you be simultaneously rooted in many places? I think that's the thing.
Right.
And it's possible. Rooting is not a singular thing. I mean, we tend to imagine it singularly because we have the metaphor of a tree or a plant, and it roots at a particular place and a particular soil. But that is actually a incorrect metaphor, perhaps, to the phenomena of cross-culturality, which I think makes for amazing things. And it's not a matter; it's just a matter of, I think, superficial and quick and easy hybridization. I think one of the things that's amazing about your performances is that, as many have noted, that in many ways your accent is perfect, right? I mean, your Urdu diction is one couldn't tell that you, but at the same time, it's you certainly are British. So it's both things that are deeply rooted and yet at the same time are international. Is, I think, what makes it fascinating.
Well, no, thank you for that. I'm very happy to hear that my accent is good. But then again, it comes from having heard Hindi when I was 6, 7,
Right,
8
right.
years old, and I learned Hindi at school. So
Yeah.
it definitely is still there in my ear. And yeah, and just going back to that metaphor you had of a tree that's rooted in the earth. The thing is, humans, we're not rooted. We are constantly moving. And so with our movement, we experience we're nourished by different things. It's not just the soil that we have been born in. We're influenced by so many different places and people.
So, talking about soils, let's go to Himachal Pradesh. Let's go to the foothills of the Himalayas and Dharamshala. How did your Swiss, French, and British parents end up with you there in Dharamshala?
Yes. Well, actually, they had gone to see the school, which had been founded by.
This is the International Sahaj Public School, yes?
Exactly, yeah. So my parents both met in Sahaj Yoga, which is a meditation practice. And they had then heard about this school and thought it was quite interesting in terms of allowing us, their daughters, to experience this cross-cultural, very international environment whereby we meditated every morning watching the sunrise over the Himalayas. And I mean, the school is in a particularly incredible, beautiful location where you just are literally at it's the hill stations of MacLeodganj, and it is, as you said, the foothills of the
Talnu,
Himalayas.
right?
So just
Yeah.
exactly, yeah. So just behind these green mountains, you see the chain of the frosting of the Himalayas behind you, and so that was the site that we grew up with. And my parents, I think they initially thought, let's just take it as an experiment and see how the girls are there for a few months. And then they saw that we were very happy and that we were, excelling. We were just enjoying our time there. So we then stayed for the full term, which is 9 months of the year. And my twin sister and I stayed there for 3 years, going home for 3 months of the year for Christmas and then returning in March. And my elder sister, Caroline, was there for 5 years. And, when we were there, we were also given Indian names. So my sister, Nikki, and I were Bhakti and Shakti, which are, quite easy twin names.
So you were Bhakti or you were Shakti?
Mera naam Bhakti hai, and my sister was Shakti, and my elder sister was
Oh,
Mahadevi.
wow.
So, yeah. And, we were our friends were other children from different parts of the world. And we grew up listening to a range of Indian music, but we sang bhajan, and we learnt a lot about different religions from India, and it was just an invaluable experience. And I am indebted to my parents for having been brave enough to really surrender the fact that their children are going far, far away, but are being exposed to a rich culture and a rich experience that to this day inspires us, each of us. And I mean, I think I look back at that view that we grew up with, and I think about it so often. And I was 8 years old, and I had this really strong sense of self when I was that age. And I remember being a teenager in the UK and just feeling lost in my identity. And I remember feeling, I want to go back to that person I was when I
Right.
was 8, just looking out at that view. And I just had such a strong sense of self. And again, we were, very much exposed to meditation, Sahaj Yoga meditation, and just understanding what is the self, what is the spirit, what is one's identity, and just like going through very simple methods to feel that peace within.
Yeah. The experience of feeling out of place as a teen in London or the UK, wherever you
Mhm.
were,
Mhm.
and then having the opportunity to, go back in a sense to where you grew up, offered you, a place. In a sense, everybody probably remembers their childhood and or the lost childhood as with a certain nostalgia. But in your case, and in case of many, let's say, transnational citizens, there is a place that can be identified as that other place, and you went back and you did music. But did you experience any? I mean, did you just fit in straight into that school, or did you not, or you just became bhakti and you were? Did you fit right into the culture, or did you feel like an outsider at all in that community?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I am a twin, an
Mm,
identical twin. So I had my sister with me. And so I think it's a different scenario when you come into the world with someone else. So I always felt quite a strong sense of security because I had my sister at hand. And also because I'm a twin, I also desired
mm,
independence. And so I remember longing to just be on my own and wanting to go off into the jungle and, build a little cubby house for myself and wanting to be with myself and really enjoying being with myself. I remember that feeling when I was around 7 or 8. And I had very good relationships with my sisters, with my friends. So I think I had quite a good sense of security established within me from quite a young age. So I felt comfortable with many different people. And I think that probably has something to do with being an identical twin and being seen as a pair as well. Bhakti Shakti, we were always seen as a pair. And I think I longed for that sense of individuality. So I liked to be by myself, and I liked to do things by myself rather than do it as a
mhm,
pair. Yeah. But I think, of course, I remember nights, we slept in
mm,
a dorm, and there would be nights where you could just hear all the girls crying, and one would set another one off, and then we'd just start thinking about our families. And I remember I had this little photo album where I would just sort of scan through and just cry my eyes out looking at my pictures of my dog Jerry and my sister Barbara and my brother and my parents. And of course, I think looking back, it probably was hard. But children, they're so easily adaptable. I mean, I don't remember feeling, the trauma of not having my parents. I knew they loved me. I definitely had that feeling in my heart. I definitely didn't have that sense of abandonment. And I was also enriched by the people around me. I had very interesting friends, from different parts of the world. And we just kept each other going and we supported
mm.
each other. So I don't remember feeling out of place at all. If anything, I felt completely well in myself and in that environment.
Well, that's lucky. And it certainly has reflected itself in the quality and timbre of your music. I'm not sure, so I'm speculating here, but well, let's say you have kids one day. Are you going to send them to a similar school or what? Any thoughts?
You know, I would be very open to, because I know how wonderful it was for me also not to have the strings of my parents pulling me. And my parents are fantastic people and they were very loving, but they didn't get on together so much. In fact, my parents are currently divorced. And so I was grateful that I wasn't in what was quite a hostile home environment, where our parents would argue quite a bit. And I think that I would feel quite happy to allow my future child or children to experience that sense of independence from a young age. Now, of course, it would have to be negotiated with my husband because he grew up in a very tight-knit family who did everything together. And so that would be something of a negotiation. But I think it's a wonderful opportunity for a young child to have a feeling of a sense of it must start from a strong sense of security. That's what I would say. I mean, going off to a boarding school around the world far away from home is probably, to many people it sounds completely absurd, and my parents have taken a lot of stick for it, but when they see us and my sisters, they're like, oh wow, well, they've done something right, because we're all quite happy social people. And we're very grateful to have had that experience. I would say I would, whether it would be Dharamsala, the ISPS, the same school. Now it has changed hands so much. I don't know whether it has the same freedom that we had. I think the internet has also changed a lot of things. We didn't have even a telephone to call
Wow.
home. Just on the weekend, just on the weekends, we had one of those very old rotary dials, and sometimes we'd have Bhakti, your dad's calling, and we would rush to the phone. There was this one telephone, and you could just hear at the end the crackle. The crackling sound of the phone. You'd hear the voice of your parents, saying hello, and then we'd say bye and hang up the phone, and off we'd go and play. And now with the internet, it's just such a different thing. It's not
No.
the same world. And yeah, I don't know whether it would actually be the same experience for a young person anymore in this world. Like, the internet's changed so much. But I would love to offer my future children an experience where they grow up with children from different parts of the world and listen to different languages, see different ways of eating, of being, of speaking, and just assume themselves in that environment. I think that's a really wonderful thing to offer.
When I see the videos of you and your husband Paolo playing, and I see you moving through very familiar Indian classical music for me, and then I hear Paolo coming in with his guitar, I can get a sense of this negotiation that you're talking about. It's quite amazing because when he plays the guitar, it's not Indian classical guitar at all. I mean,
Yeah,
he's playing
yeah.
what he plays, right?
Plays with harmony, and he likes to change the rag, because he grew up with Western classical music, so he has a rich sense of harmony. And I think he is drawn to Indian classical music, but he likes to play. He likes to maybe play with the notes of a rag and put a different color on it. And I keep telling him sometimes, no, you can't change the mood. Like, the rag has a specific mood that has to be respected. And only in light classical, so the ghazal and the tumri, I allow him to just do what he wants. But if we were to do, a strictly classical concert, then well, he would need to learn the rag and be able to really stick to the rules of the rag. And yeah, I mean, I think negotiating with your partner, it is an interesting scenario, because as an artist, you do want to be free to fully express yourself. And I think with Seven Eyes, I'm learning a lot about how it is I want to express myself. And I'm learning a lot with Paolo also about Western harmony, because I'm drawn to the melody, but I'm now learning a lot about Western classical music, Western harmony, and Western theory. And for my birthday, Paolo gifted me 10 piano lessons with a wonderful jazz pianist called Alciona Mick. And so she's teaching me a little bit about harmony on the piano. And I'm really grateful to experience that, something new. And, also the fact that Paolo's from Brazil, it's again something completely new for me. Like, I thought that having lived in India, I would sort of take to Brazil quite easily, but actually it was quite a culture shock for me. Yeah, I mean, it's just I really felt very different and very English. And I think it's also because I didn't speak Portuguese. I wasn't able to communicate with his family at first. Now, thankfully, I'm getting better at it. But I think there's so much to know about a country with its language and with the way people are with each other. So, in India, you can just nod your head and make yourself understood.
Well, there are 16 different nods, as you know.
Right. And so in Brazil, they have their own mannerisms of communicating that I didn't know how to read, or so it's definitely an interesting phenomenon, being married to someone from a different culture. And I feel blessed to be able to now be opened to a world of rich music and culture that I hadn't ever known before. So yeah, it's a wonderful thing. And we have decided to come together as Seven Eyes, as this band, and make music that we write and that we compose together. Something that I'm learning a lot from.
I mean, it's a fascinating journey. And as we move towards the end over here, one of the other amazing, there are two types of things that I'm hearing in your life and discussion. One is the sort of deeply known cross-culturality that comes from your life having lived in India and, of course, the UK, and I suppose to a certain extent continental, Switzerland, or Swiss French UK. But then there's also the cross-culturality that comes from active negotiation with a place that you don't have some kind of a background in, as for instance Brazil. And those are two different, even though related things. And I'm thinking about Philip Glass and Ravi Shankar and their relationship. I don't know if you've heard the Passages album. Yeah,
yes,
I love that. It's an amazing album, and that's also another model of kind of exchange between musical genres. So I thought, in closing, I might ask you. It says over here on your website, quote, "At the top of their game, he's a wonderful guitarist," and he's talking, of course, about Paolo. You have Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin endorsing your work. Led Zeppelin, I love Led Zeppelin, but that's a long way from your music.
Yeah. Oh, that was a wonderful meeting we had with Jimmy Page. He actually came to one of our shows unknowingly. We didn't know he was in the audience. And after the show, he stepped up on stage and just took Paolo by the hand, and they spoke for quite a long time about guitar. And then later he came backstage and, he just said, "You guys just need to keep doing what you're doing." In the early days of Led Zeppelin, we were playing around with mixing different genres. And, if you look at, is it song Kashmir?
Greatest song, yeah. but they've never been to Kashmir.
Right. But you see, they were already interested in mixing different forms of music. And, I think he just told us to keep open. Do not put yourself in a box, because people will try and box you. And I think, with Seven Eyes, we have kept ourselves open. And to some people, that's quite confusing, because they ask, are you a ghazal artist? Or, is your next album going to be ghazals? Or do we have Brazilian music now? Or do we have English folk music? And it can be quite confusing. But, for us, we just want to be able to be free in expressing what we feel we need to express at that moment. And we do have a ghazal album, which we're working on, which we recorded in Pakistan last November. And we've got a compilation of well-loved popular ghazals, and then we're also thinking about maybe just putting down some old Brazilian songs which are so beautifully composed, songs from the 50s, a lot of bossa nova. And we are essentially students. I definitely consider myself a student still, and I constantly want to learn and be informed by my hunger for knowledge, and just be free and not be put in any box that people kind of assume this is who you are. Again, going back to this idea of national identity, oh, I'm British, so I have to be like this. No, I mean, I want to be free to express and learn and be able to engage with music and culture in the way any person would be. And I'm very lucky that I have been exposed to multiple cultures. And, now I do definitely feel a lot more at ease with Portuguese and Brazilian music, because I'm learning. And I think that's the key. We have to be open to learn about other people, about their language, their culture, their roots, their tradition, and understand. Once we start to engage with that learning, we drop this wall of difference, and we can then begin to shake hands, and there's a sense of understanding occurs, and then we just find ourselves at ease and at one with the person who was so-called othered. So I think it's about being open to be receptive to the other, to another person and their ways. And actually, we find that essentially we're all pretty much the same. I mean, we have the same emotions, we have the same ways of expressing ourselves, we have the same needs, the same wants. And it's just superficial barriers like language or culture that make us seem different.
Indeed. Well, you're doing a great job of making some amazing music out of that. Please keep that coming. I'm such a fan. Tanya, thank you for taking time to have this conversation.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Architecture Talk. This is your producer, Amelia Jarvinen. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, and if you did, please subscribe and rate us on iTunes or Spotify. We would also love to hear from you if you have any suggestions on new topics or guests. You can always reach out to us on our website, Facebook, or Instagram. Thank you again, and until next time, this is Architecture Talk.